My name is Kelsey. I am 32 years old. 3 days ago, I sat in a high-priced attorney's office, read a single piece of paper, and laughed so hard the lawyer stopped writing, looked up, and asked if I needed a glass of water. My family had not spoken to me in 2 years. There were no birthday cards, no holiday texts, absolutely nothing. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, their lawyer sent me one urgent document. They desperately wanted my signature on a quitclaim deed, all so they could liquidate great-grandfather Charles's mountain lodge to save my bankrupt sister. Instead of breaking down or crying, I just laughed. It was pure, unadulterated accounting. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was entirely clinical. When the text message from my mother, Patricia, hit my phone at precisely 11:51 p.m., my chest didn't tighten and my hands didn't shake. The message was characteristically brief, a flat, unyielding command disguised as family duty telling me that my signature was required on the quitclaim deed by noon tomorrow for the survival of the family lineage. Seconds later, my sister Jessica hearted the message. For years, a notification like that would have triggered a familiar, suffocating panic, a desperate, frantic urge to solve their self-inflicted crises just to earn a seat at their table. But as I stared at the glowing screen in the absolute dark of my bedroom, I rubbed my eyes trying to summon a single ounce of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. I didn't cry, I didn't ask why, and I certainly didn't type a single word in response. I simply closed the messaging app, walked calmly over to my desk, and opened my laptop. By exactly 12:03 a.m., precisely 12 minutes after her text arrived, I was logged into my senior data analyst network. The pacing of my retaliation was driven entirely by logic, not emotion. For the past 6 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, quietly maintaining the structural, back-end architecture of my father Gregory's regional logistics fleet. I had built their entire digital operational network completely from scratch, working until dawn to fix their systemic accounting errors, all while they celebrated Jessica's endless, mediocre milestones. I had given them my hard-earned expertise as a luxury subscription, with me footing the entire bill. My compassion had been a resource they had overdrafted for years, assuming my low-maintenance nature meant my supply was bottomless. They weren't shocked by the cruelty of what they had done. They were simply shocked that I had stopped playing along. With a few deliberate, steady keystrokes, I initiated a complete administrative override. I systematically revoked my personal API access keys, terminated the unpaid server hosting contracts registered under my name, and deactivated the cloud-based infrastructure parameters I had established for their transport fleet. I watched the server status bars crawl across the monitor, turning steadily from a compliant green to an unyielding, encrypted blue. One by one, their freight tracking modules went dark, instantly freezing their active shipping pipelines and mapping networks across 3 state lines. Without those keys, their entire commercial distribution system was functionally blind, trapped in a digital dead zone of their own making. I stopped auditing their midnight balance sheets, and I permanently deleted the automated alerts that used to pull me out of sleep to fix their baseline corporate incompetence. Inside my room, the laptop screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of cold facts, absolute numbers, and quiet, rhythmic retribution. I realized the only power they ever truly held over me was the power I had handed them out of a desperate childhood need to belong. That contract was officially canceled. The family dining room in their grand Asheville estate always smelled of expensive jasmine, perfume, and cold, heavy abandonment. I spent my entire youth sitting at the far edge of the spares table, watching my mother and father, Gregory, pour every ounce of validation into my sister, Jessica. Growing up under their roof, I was never treated with love, but out of a calculated duty to exploit great-grandfather Charles's lingering estate. Jessica was the golden child, a fragile, coddled extension of their social vanity. When her luxury spa chain began bleeding capital due to her sheer incompetence, the family dynamic dictated that I absorb the structural damage. They squeezed me because I was low maintenance, expecting me to be the invisible, unpaid financial engine of their survival. I remember the night I handed Gregory a check for $10,000 of my hard-earned savings, just to cover an emergency cash flow loop they had severely overdrafted. He didn't say thank you, and he didn't even look up from his ledger. He just muttered that my compliance was expected because they had given me a home. When I was 19, I asked Gregory to co-sign a modest student loan so I could finish my advanced finance degree. He slipped my dean's list certificate under a massive stack of Jessica's cheerleading flyers, patted my shoulder with clinical detachment, and told me that my request was an unreasonable speculation. He looked me straight in the eye and said I was a utility to this family, not an investment. Back then, I believed him. I wore strong like a heavy metal, spending my early 20s working double shifts, accumulating heavy debt, and swallowing my own achievements just to keep their peace. I even quietly funded Jessica's elite private boarding school tuition while I survived on discounted groceries and static silence. People look at me now, knowing my high-end data analyst credentials and my corporate stability, and they ask a dangerous question: why did you stay? And why did an educated woman let a parasitic network bleed her for so many years before finally finding her spark? What they completely misunderstand is the invisible chain of a survivor, the crushing, exhausting weight of learned help. My silence wasn't a symptom of weakness. It was a mandatory strategy for survival. When you are conditioned from early childhood to believe that your only worth lies in your absolute utility, compliance becomes your only source of oxygen. You wear the title of the strong one, completely blind to the fact that it is actually a shroud wrapped tightly around your own throat. You normalize the casual cruelty because fighting an enmeshed system that holds all the leverage feels entirely impossible. You become a compliant prisoner in a house with no song sheets, trapped by the terrifying illusion that if you just give up a little more of your soul, they might finally look at you and see a daughter instead of a transaction. But that table never had a place card with my name on it. It was always a stage, and I was just the machinery hidden behind the curtain, keeping their performance running. The reaction from the family was immediate and vicious. When you cut off the supply of blood to a parasitic system, it doesn't apologize, it lashing out. The silent phone on my counter began a frantic, nonstop dance. My mother and father Gregory had finally realized that their logistics fleet was completely blind across 3 state lines. But instead of picking up the phone to account for their behavior, they chose to rewrite the narrative. They chose the weapon they always used when facts failed them: systemic gaslighting. Patricia didn't just stop at angry texts. She structuralized a highly coordinated campaign to completely neutralize my credibility. She sent long, detailed messages to the entire parish church network and even leaked a formal email to my corporate operations manager at my firm. The lie was precise, calculated, and deeply malicious. She claimed I was undergoing a severe mental breakdown, an emotional episode that rendered my data analysis entirely untrustworthy. She whispered to our relatives that my husband, Trevor, was dangerously controlling me, isolating me from the family out of pure spite, and forcing me to sabotage their livelihood. Jessica quickly towed the line, posting public updates on her social media channels about the tragic loss of family loyalty. She painted herself as the heartbroken victim, a hardworking entrepreneur whose dreams were being maliciously crushed by an ungrateful, vindictive sister who couldn't stand to see others succeed. They needed to insulate themselves from the looming financial shame of her collapsing spa business, so they turned me into the villain. They manufactured a version of me that was broken, unhinged, and emotionally volatile, all to ensure that if I ever spoke the truth about their financial exploitation, the town would already be conditioned to disregard my voice. I sat at the kitchen island watching my phone screen light up repeatedly, a localized storm of digital hatred flashing against the smooth surface. I didn't type a single response, and I didn't call Patricia to defend my sanity. Instead, I picked up the device and turned it face down on the granite counter. I watched the reflection of the flashing screen slowly fade beneath the solid edge like a dying storm, choosing sovereign stillness over their manufactured chaos. Everything stayed silent inside our home for days. But in my head, their historical accusations kept echoing a repeated loop of their oldest script. They weren't shocked by the financial disruption I had caused. They were terrified because they no longer controlled the narrative. They had spent decades treating me like an invisible asset, and now that the asset had boundaries, they needed to pathologize my strength. But the math didn't lie. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't shrinking to accommodate their comfort. I was standing perfectly still, anchored by my own clarity, waiting for the legal dust to settle. I stopped engaging on their emotional playground entirely. The absolute moment a family conflict turns into a targeted character assassination, you do not fight back with loud explanations or defensive texts. You change the venue, you move the battlefield from a messy kitchen table to a sterile, legally binding arena. I closed my personal phone, packed my data logs, and initialized a connection with the only person who could translate my analytical data into legal weapons. I called Amanda. She had been my closest confidant since our university days, but today she wasn't a shoulder to cry on. She was a forensic asset attorney who spent her career tracking corporate liabilities and dismantling hidden financial fraud. When I walked into Amanda's downtown office, the environment felt instantly neutralizing. The space smelled of freshly printed bond paper, cold glass, and absolute clinical precision. I didn't present her with a narrative of parental rejection or hurt feelings, and I didn't talk about the jasmine perfume or the spares table. Instead, I laid down an encrypted digital drive containing 6 years of verified server metrics, logistical architecture logs, and the certified bank statements proving my historical capital injections into my father, Gregory's transport business. Amanda didn't offer empty words of sympathy. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the raw columns of data, and smiled a cold, methodical smile. She looked up and told me that they had treated my life's work like an open-ended credit line with zero collateral. It was time to trigger the margin call. They thought my silence meant I was still caving. They had no idea I was just letting the legal gears turn in the dark. The legal investigation didn't stall over their public outcries. While Patricia and Gregory were busy manufacturing their emotional narrative across the parish, Amanda was executing a forensic audit deep within the ancestral archives of Timber Mountain Lodge. The historical county land registries and estate ledgers were laid out beneath the sharp neon lights of her workspace. For weeks, she traced every corporate transaction, every land allocation, and every hidden equity transfer tied to my lineage. I didn't sit in her office hoping for an apology. I sat there waiting for the numbers to align. In finance, there is no room for interpretation. A ledger is either balanced or it is compromised. As Amanda's tracking software cross-referenced the legacy records, an interwoven memory pulled me back to a quiet afternoon from my childhood. I was 10 years old, standing by great-grandfather Charles's old mahogany workbench while the mountain wind rustled the pine needles outside. He had looked at me with his sharp, knowing eyes, handed me a simple wooden ruler, and told me that numbers are the only honest language left in the world. He said that a ledger never harbors a grudge, and math never tells a lie, but people with empty pockets and bloated pride will always try to alter the math to suit their own illusions. Back then, I didn't understand the depth of his warning. Looking at Amanda's screen now, the past and the present collided with lethal precision. Amanda stopped clicking. She removed her glasses slowly, reached for a red digital marker, and highlighted a specific filing date from 7 years ago. The screen flashed with a shocking layer of financial fraud. She pointed directly to a signature mismatch on a corporate deed transfer, a clumsy, desperate forgery of great-grandfather Charles's signature. Gregory and Patricia had not merely been neglectful or financially demanding. They had systemically executed a fraudulent transaction to intercept an asset that never belonged to them. They had completely embezzled a land trust fund valued at $360,000, a fund explicitly earmarked by Charles for my exclusive independent lineage. Amanda explained that because the bank initiated foreclosure on Jessica's failing business, their title insurance company flagged a massive cloud on title due to that old signature mismatch. The liquidation was completely frozen. They desperately needed my signature on a quitclaim deed to retroactively legitimize the chain of title and bury their grand larceny before the district attorney stepped in. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was a felony. The red lines on the ledger document sat on the center of the desk, like the definitive weapon that would strip them of any remaining path to redemption. They had spent decades treating me like an invisible, low-maintenance asset while actively stealing the very inheritance Charles had built to secure my freedom. They had forced me to wear the title of the strong child to cover up the tracks of their own criminality. Amanda looked directly at me and stated that this signature mismatch wasn't a civil dispute. It was grand larceny and bank fraud. The high-priced facade they had spent a lifetime constructing was officially reduced to a criminal indictment. They thought they were holding a quitclaim deed to force my submission, but they were actually holding their own prison sentence. The freezing mountain wind howled across the porch steps of our home, rustling the thick legal files Amanda had delivered that morning. It was a brutal, bone-chilling cold that perfectly matched the absolute clinical finality settling in my chest. Through the glass, I watched two figures ascend the stairs. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Gregory, didn't carry themselves with the curated arrogance of parish pillars anymore. Patricia's designer coat was unbuttoned, her hair disheveled, and her eyes were raw and swollen from crying. Gregory walked with a heavy, defeated slouch, looking incredibly small and hollowed out. The local bank had initiated immediate foreclosure protocols on their properties, and the district attorney was finalizing the formal indictments for grand larceny. Their high-priced sanctuary was officially collapsing under a debt of $360,000. Patricia dropped to her knees right there on the hard wood of the porch, her manicured hands shaking violently as she reached out to touch the hem of my coat. She didn't offer a loud lecture this time. She coughed through desperate, calculated tears, begging me to withdraw the forensic audit, to tell Amanda to drop the asset freezes, and to save Jessica's social reputation from public ruin. Gregory stood behind her, his voice cracking as he whispered that families are supposed to protect each other from destruction, that I was being cruel to my own blood over a historical misunderstanding. I looked down at them with absolute clinical detachment. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret or hesitation, but there was only a clean, icy clarity. This wasn't a family dynamic anymore, it was a margin call. Seeing them reduced to this pathetic state didn't bring me a loud sense of triumph. It brought me an analytical validation. This was the ultimate realization of the illusion of power in an empty purse. For 30 years, this family had operated under the delusion that their wealth, their social status, and their moral posturing made them inherently superior to me, but their authority was never real. It was a temporary shell, an expensive facade they had rented using stolen capital and subsidized by my silent, low-maintenance survival. They had spent decades overdrafting my compassion, treating my boundaries as a negotiable transaction. Now that the stolen capital was frozen, their entire narcissistic structure collapsed instantly because they had zero internal character or authentic moral value to stand on. When the purse is emptied, the narcissist is revealed as nothing more than a bankrupt actor stripped of their script. Patricia sobbed louder, claiming that Jessica's new spa chain would be permanently destroyed if the bank canceled their final grace period next week and forced an immediate liquidation sale. She asked how I could be so heartless to the family that raised me. I didn't argue, and I didn't yell. I simply opened the glass door a few inches, reached into my legal folder, and handed Gregory a certified copy of the official trespass and eviction notice for Timber Mountain Lodge. They had illegally attempted to occupy the property, assuming I would cave under the weight of family history. I looked my mother straight in the eyes, delivered the final blow in a calm, lethal tone, and said that the lodge belonged exclusively to my great-grandfather's trust. Goodbye, Patricia. I closed the door, engaged the heavy deadbolt, and walked back to my spreadsheet. The finality of the system's collapse didn't require my constant monitoring. Trevor and I permanently moved into Timber Mountain Lodge, stripped the weathered cedar exterior, and replaced the compromised infrastructure with our own hands. We rewired the entire foundation, filling the once isolated space with the warm scent of freshly cut timber and roaring hearths. Gregory and Patricia's meticulously constructed illusion evaporated completely. Unable to cover the $360,000 in fraudulent liabilities and facing total exile from the Asheville Parish Network, they filed for absolute bankruptcy. They lost their home, liquidated their remaining assets, and retreated into a cramped, rented trailer on the outskirts of the county. Jessica's luxury spa chain vanished within months under a mountain of unresolved debt, leaving her to face the static reality of a life unsupported by stolen capital. I mailed one final letter to my parents. It wasn't written through Amanda's legal proxy, nor was it fueled by lingering anger. I flatly informed them that Timber Mountain Lodge would remain securely within the trust, unliquidated and untouched. Then I structuralized the only terms I would ever accept. I wrote that if they ever desired to rebuild a shred of this relationship, it would require absolute therapeutic honesty. It required them to see me not as the low maintenance utility, not as the strong child who can survive without love, but simply as their daughter. My door is open, but only if they approach it as guardians seeking connection, not consumers looking for a financial bailout. I hit send, closed my ledger, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wait for their approval. I've come to realize that when a family unit continuously labels you as the strong one, they are rarely paying a tribute to your resilience. They are validating their own convenience. They are framing their emotional abandonment as an acknowledgement of your independence so they can harvest your labor without facing their own guilt. If you find yourself in a similar situation, sitting in the quiet margins of a family that demands your silence as the price of admission, remember this. You do not owe your life to a system that requires you to stay small so others can remain comfortable. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the expectation of love that will never arrive. Boundaries are not angry walls built out of spite. Boundaries are doors. You decide who gets to walk through, and you must stop leaving them open for people who only visit when they need something to consume. My name is Kelsey. I am 32 years old. My family's rejection cost them a loyal daughter who would have protected them, but it gave me something far more valuable. It gave me myself. If this story reached a place you've been hiding, hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs to find their voice today, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below.